Hello to folks joining in. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll get started in just about 30 seconds. For folks who are just coming in, please note that we have started recording and transcription. Okay, looks like the lobby has slowed, so I am going to call it, and then we may just have some folks join in as we get started here. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome on a Monday afternoon after a potentially long weekend. I hope everybody is doing well today. If we have not met before, my name is Courtney O'Brien. I am the Interim Operations Director here at the Agency of Education, and our team is supporting a series of workshops and webinars hosted by New Solutions K12, who has partnered with the agency to provide some outreach and training and really great resource and information and a little bit of analysis on our current financial system and education finance. So we're so happy to be kicking this off. As a quick introduction before we get into our facilitators today, I would just like to share with folks that this effort did come about as a result of the 2024 Listen and Learn Tour and some of the information and feedback that the agency had received from field. We are very grateful to Nate and his team and David for being here today and for being willing to step in and provide this resource to us all. We will allow David and Nate to do the presenting today. I'm not sure how much time we have built in for Q&A, but I would encourage folks to also review our website. The agency's website is now updated with information about this series, and you should be able to select sessions that best fit your needs. Also from my team, just very briefly, on this call we have Taylor Goodwin. Hello, Taylor. Taylor is helping to facilitate some of the logistics and the behind the scenes work for these meetings as well. So should anyone have any questions following today's meeting, please feel free to reach out to myself or Taylor and we will be happy to help. Okay. All right. Well, Nate and David, I'm so excited to have you here to kick these off. Welcome, welcome. Would you be willing to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your work?
Great. I'm Nate Levenson, president of New Solutions K12. Former superintendent, so I've sat in some of your shoes, written 4 books on school finance, so I have wrestled with many of the budget and financial challenges you all are facing, and have spent about the last 15 years working with quite a few districts in Vermont and across 29 other states as well. And David?
Hi, everyone. David James, Managing Director with New Solutions K12. I started my career as a middle school science teacher and eventually was a principal. And like Nate, I've worked with a number of districts in Vermont, and I've written a book with Nate on strategic scheduling and staffing. So really excited to be part of these conversations.
Great.
Excellent. Well, Nate, I think we'll turn it over to you, and this is your session to lead. Taylor will be here in the background should you need anything. And again, folks, thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. Super excited to be with you. I know this is both a very timely topic, but also a little bit out of time as well. I think you're getting some feedback. If everybody's can mute.
Folks who've just joined, please be sure to mute your microphones. Thank you.
Thanks. So we know that everybody in the state is wrestling with tight budgets. We know everybody in the country is wrestling with tight budgets. I also just want to acknowledge that while I hope you will find this session and all the subsequent sessions really helpful, we also want to acknowledge that we know most of you are deep into the budget development cycle. Some of you may even be done with the budgets that you're going to be presenting. And yes, this would have been better to do a month or 2 ago, but we weren't ready and able to do it a month or 2 ago. We also know that budget will continue to be developed over the next few months. And so really hoping this is very helpful to you all. We also want to acknowledge that we will be sharing strategies with you. And some of you are going to be thinking, hey, I know that, or I want to do that, but I do not have the authority as a district leader, as a school business official, as a principal, even as an individual board member to make these changes unilaterally. We know that budgeting is more than just knowing what to do. And based on that, and based on a lot of feedback from folks in the field, we are going to spend as much time in these sessions talking about how do you win support and gather the necessary votes and support to make some of these changes. So We have been listening to you. I hope that's reflected in what we share today. Last thing to know about these sessions is we are going to keep this one's to 30 minutes. Most of them will be 30 or 45 minutes long. We're going to take a fairly small chunk of information, share it, and then move on in another day to another session. We're doing that so you can listen to just the ones that are most relevant to you, because we know how busy everybody is. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully everybody is seeing my screen, and today's session is focusing on staffing elementary classroom teachers precisely. I've already shared with you enough of my background, and just want to say this is a joint effort between New Solutions and the Agency of Education. On the issue of questions, here's what we heard from all of you. We said, hey, Nate, please be sure to leave a lot of time for us to ask questions, and please keep these really short because we're very, very busy. So we have decided that hopefully the best way to do both of those things is we're not going to spend much or even any time answering questions during today's session. You've got a QR code, and when you download this document, you'll also have a link where you can submit your questions. We will then both respond back to you individually and summarize the most frequently asked questions and answer them and post them to the agency's website as well. So we really do want your questions, but we wanted to do it in a way that respected your busy schedules as well. We will also be hosting office hours where folks can call in, Zoom in, Teams in to ask additional questions. We have not yet set those dates. So hopefully this is a good way of both answering as many questions as possible and doing it in the most efficient way possible. Okay, that's all of my preamble. Now let's dive into it. As we think about the challenge of what we call strategic budgeting, doing the most you can with the dollars you have, living within these ever-tightening budgets, is we first want to acknowledge that to do that well, there's a technical side. That's calculating exactly how many teachers you need or finding the most efficient ways to do things. But we also want to acknowledge that there's a political side. No good idea gets built into the budget if you can't get the community and the school board and your own staff to support it. So we are going to talk about how do you win political support for these decisions. And the last thing we wanted to acknowledge and build into our advice to you all is what we're calling the practical side. The practical side are all the complexities that happen in K-12, and especially that happen in some smaller districts. The average district in Vermont is small, which means some of the more common strategies are harder to do. And we're really trying to share advice that is both practical, politically savvy, and technically correct. So what does that mean? When it comes to staffing elementary classroom teachers, two strategies we want to discuss today is one is a strategy of setting class-side guidelines in advance. And the second is creating incentives for people to live with and live by those class-size guidelines. So what do we know about elementary classes? We know that small classes are great. They're great for kids, they're great for teachers, and they're great for the way we do things in Vermont. In fact, people just love really small classes, and that has become, in many school systems across the state, a mainstay of budgeting. We also know that small classes are really expensive, and that's creating the tension. Your average class size is one of the largest, most significant drivers of your total budget. Sometimes at this point, we want to look to the research, and the research says small class size is not that important. Remember, folks, I told you we want to be practical, we want to be politically astute, and I want to just say out loud that we know, and this is not just a Vermont issue, this is an issue across the country. While the research has been saying small class size is not that important for 25 years, very few people believe the research. And we are not actually recommending that you get in front of a community and say, hey, Nate says, or John Hattie says, small classes are not that important. Because not that many people will believe you. So how do you reconcile the fact that small classes are beloved and expensive? Research says they're not that important, and yet most folks believe they're really critically important to a great education. What we're suggesting is that when you think about managing class size, is to move it beyond the technical and to really start thinking about those other factors. Because we know from a purely technical point of view, if you were a little bit of a bigger district, you could say, hey, first graders, we've got 60 of them, and we want 20 kids in a classroom. And boom, okay, we're going to have 3 classrooms. That's like the really simple version of managing class size, right? But that is not the challenges that we're seeing many of you wrestle with. So how do you deal with some of the bigger challenges? Because if you had 60 kids and you wanted 20 in a class, that's really easy. But the decisions become a lot less obvious at different levels of kids. If you've got 23 students in the first grade in a building, 23 might feel like it's too big for one class, but it also, cutting that in half, dropping to 11, 12 kids, that might feel pretty small to folks who are concerned about their taxes. It's like this example of 60 kids and going into 3 classes. That's what we'll call the simple example. But it's really these less simple examples that are the next frontier. Another example we'll talk about is, hey, if you only got 16 kids in 2 grade levels, does it make sense to have 2 sections of 8? Or is this the time to have a multi-age classroom? And the point is that like smart, thoughtful people can and should debate and disagree on what to do in these situations. And we're going to give you some ideas on how to deal with those, what we're calling the gray areas, the less simple areas. We also want to acknowledge this is the practical side. Hey, what if the school, back to that example of 60 students and we want 20 kids in a class, but what if you already had 4 teachers at that grade level? You don't want to lose a great teacher. We know that, the staff you already have definitely influences how people think about how many classes to have next year. And so we also have some ideas that we want to share with you on what do you do when the math says, hey, we should drop a section, and the practical nature says, whoa, if we did that, we might lose a great teacher, and great teachers are too hard to come by. And when we need another great teacher in a year, we might not be able to find one. So I just want to say up front, when we think about elementary class size, we really need to be putting a lot of energy around some of these special cases. And we say that because we think on the less special cases, most school systems are doing a pretty nice job already. So how do you do that? Here is my number one takeaway based on a few decades of helping school systems, hundreds and hundreds of them, think through elementary class size. And the takeaway is never go shopping when you're hungry. And what I mean by that is setting class size targets for all the possibilities way in advance of building the budget is a way of actually building support for these very thoughtful staffing strategies. So I want to say that again. Our recommendation is to build in advance all of the possible variations in enrollment and determine how many kids and how many sections, how many classrooms you would have well in advance of actually building the budget. It makes it less personal. And we've found, and we'll talk you through this in a bit of more detail, it's built much more support for these very thoughtful decisions. So basically what it says is you need to create some class size targets. They will definitely differ or could differ by grade level. You want to apply those targets to all the possible cases of enrollment. And then you want to debate and make some decisions in advance, not in the moment. What does that look like? It looks like creating a chart, and we're going to give you a link and post to the AOE website this exact chart where it says, hey, if I've got an enrollment of 16 kids, 17 kids, 18 kids, right up to 100 students in a grade level. And I know most of you won't have 100 kids in a grade level, but we've covered every range. And we've said, hey, here are all the possibilities. If I have one classroom, two classrooms, three classrooms, what would the class size be? This is just simple math, obviously. This is what's possible. But what we're suggesting is that you make decisions in advance. Now, obviously, let me start with a really easy decision. If you had 16 kids in one grade level, you're not going to have two classes of 8. You're not going to have three classes of 5 or 6. You're very likely to have one class of 16 students. That's what we'd call the easy decision. But 23 kids, I've sat in on a number of meetings in Vermont schools where with 23 kids, some people are saying, maybe it's the chief business officer, hey, we could have 23 fifth graders in a classroom. And we've had other people say, no, that just seems too big. We'd much rather a class of 11 and a class of 12. And again, I think smart people can have that debate, but I think having that debate as you're building the budget is the wrong time to have that debate. And what we're suggesting is that as a school system, you look at all the enrollment ranges that are realistic for your district or SU. And at every single level of enrollment, you have the discussion of what would you do the next time you see 23 kids at a grade level. And again, you could have a different answer for kindergarten than you would have for 5th grade, but you would have that in writing. You would have, and we also are suggesting that many school committees actually vote on these kind of charts saying, hey, the leadership has recommended at 22, at 23, at 24, at 25, 26, right up through all those numbers, here's what we would do. And then you end up with a chart that looks like this, where the yellow is what your decisions are. And what this does is it makes the decision that at 22, you will have one class, and at 23, you will have two, or vice versa, depending on what decisions you made. But by making these decisions in advance, we have found it has been much easier for school systems to implement them. We've also found that who's in the room when you're making these decisions really matters. For example, when I've led these discussions and we've had middle and high school principals at the table, weighing in, sharing their perspective, them explaining and sharing that, hey, if you have two classrooms instead of one, that probably means we're going to be short one teacher at the middle school or high school. These are not easy discussions to have, but they're very powerful discussions to have. The same thing works for multi-grade classrooms. So, hey, if you've got 13 kids between kindergarten and 1st grade, that might be a single class. And again, but you might have made a different decision for when to go to multi-age and when to have two single-age classrooms at, say, grades 1 and 2. Here's grades 2 and 3. And again, the charts that we will provide you that you can link to during the session, at the end of the session, takes you right out through grades 5 and 6. And again, the theory is make these decisions of when you would have a multi-age classroom or when you wouldn't, well in advance, debate them, but then live by them. And again, this has really helped people implement and get the support. So all these tools that I've just shared with you will be on the AOE website, or when you get this PowerPoint, there will be a link to it. Now, if that's the technical side with a little bit of politics, and we do think the politics is making decisions in advance really helps, I want to acknowledge that even with that, there will be pushback. So we want to talk about 4 strategies for creating incentives so that more folks go along with these decisions. Because again, what we've heard from a lot of people in the field is, Nate, we understand the research on class size. We're trying to schedule staff efficiently and thoughtfully, respectful to taxpayers, but it can be really hard to make some of these changes. So why is it so darn hard to reduce elementary classrooms even with declining enrollment? One, because principals can feel picked on. Two, schools don't want to lose a great teacher. Three, teachers don't like it. And four, principals, and no insult to any principal who's on this session, principals can feel like they're hurting their kids by reducing the number of teachers in their building, and they're not helping them, and no principal wants to be in that position. So these to us are the four most common reasons it's hard to reduce elementary classrooms, even if the numbers say you should. So what do you do about each of these four? This idea that principals can feel picked on. When I was a superintendent, I first implemented something like this. But the reason we did it was every time we said, hey, such and such a school, you should have one less teacher because of enrollment, that principal felt like, why is it only me? Why is my school the one you're cutting? Why isn't this being done everywhere? Felt very unfair. And I get that, because I suspect that historically there might have been some arbitrary decisions. The power of this making the decision in advance is you didn't even know whether you're going to be losing a section in one school or another in the future. This has really helped principals believe that this is a fair, transparent, equally applied rule. And again, as I said, having secondary principals help build these guidelines can really help make these guidelines feel like they're reflecting the needs of the entire district, but no one school is being picked upon. Second, nobody wants to lose a great teacher. And I've heard from many of you that, hey, if I run these numbers and we drop a first grade teacher, we're going to lose this teacher with not a lot of seniority who's just amazing, and we wouldn't want to do that. And I don't want you to lose a great teacher. So what we've suggested, and we've had districts do this, it's called using attrition and contingent budgeting. Attrition is easy. If a teacher didn't come back, you say, okay, we'll drop the section because we're not letting anybody go. We're not losing that great teacher. We had a vacancy and we're not going to fill it. That's a great strategy, but many of you are building your budget so far in advance of knowing which teachers are staying and which teachers are going. And Vermont builds their budgets earlier than most places. So attrition is harder for Vermont districts to use. So as a result, we're suggesting using what's called contingent budgeting. And it says that you will actually vote, when you vote your budget, a statement that goes something like this. Again, based on having those class size guiding charts, but you vote that says the district is committed to meeting our class size guidelines, while at the same time wishes to respect and honor our existing staff. To that end, some spending shifts will be contingent on staff attrition. If an elementary classroom teacher opts to retire or leave the district before the start of next school year, then 2 first grade classrooms will be funded in the budget instead of 3. This is really saying you will make the change if you could do it without losing the teacher you didn't want to lose, but you won't do it if you're going to lose that great teacher. Now, sometimes your budget is too tight and you don't have this option, but we have found that this contingent budgeting allows you to put on the table more possibilities. And unfortunately, there is a fair amount of turnover in public education these days. And this is a way to capture some, but not all of that. Third thought, we know that teachers prefer smaller classes. And so it's not at all surprising that teachers are saying, hey, don't reduce any of the classes in my building. We've also know, particularly if you have an incredibly effective teacher, that nothing is better for kids than having more kids in front of an incredibly effective teacher. So some school systems have sought volunteers through financial incentives to voluntarily take on a larger class. So rather than having all of your classes being the same size, that you might actually see a teacher take on 4 or 5 extra students, which would allow you then to reduce your classes by 1 section. And these tend to be pretty substantial incentives. It's $10,000 or $15,000 to take on a larger class, or to take on a multi-age classroom where you might have had 2 small standalone classrooms. We're doing this to support and incentivize a change. It is cost beneficial, but it's also really, really good for the students if you're only offering this to teachers who are highly effective. And obviously, if a teacher is volunteering to do this because of the incentive, you're not going to see the same kind of pushback. And then the fourth reason that is often hard to make these changes is that principals can feel they're hurting their kids, not helping them. I will tell you that I experienced that firsthand as a superintendent. And so we created this structure to split the benefits with the school. And we said that if principals supported a reduction year over year in classroom staffing, that 50% of the first year savings were reinvested in the school. So we didn't reduce the budget by 100% of, say, that teacher's salary. We reduced it by 50% in that first year. And the principal had enormous say over how that 50% would be saved. It didn't have complete unilateral say, but a lot of say. And that actually encouraged 4 of my 7 principals to be pretty supportive of some changes in class size, because they knew they were going to be able to reinvest that money in other things that they valued greatly. So that is a fairly quick walk through both the value of setting class size guidelines in advance, and hopefully 4 strategies to help create the incentives to be able to bring those to life. As we mentioned, that we have other sessions coming, each of them being 30 minutes on staffing and longer ones when they come to the communication. This list is available, and I want to put up one more time. If you didn't take a picture the first time with your phone, this is a link to and a QR code to submit your questions. If you submit a question, we will definitely answer it. We will get back to you with the answer, and we will also collate the most commonly asked questions and share them statewide. And that is what we have for this afternoon. So I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully that was, yep, I lived within the time frame, and hopefully gave you some thoughts on how to deal with what is a really important and very tricky issue of what's the right number of classroom teachers to have in your elementary schools.
All right. Thank you, Nate, so much. Thank you, David. Thank you to all of our friends over at New Solutions. We are so appreciative to have you here today. And for everybody else, that is a wrap for this first presentation. And our next one is going to be next Monday at 3. Thank you all for your time. Bye.